Association, and has given us the pleasure to come. As you know, today we are going to talk about the inflation and monetary policy. And our guest, Evi Papa, I think that is the best person to talk about this. As a brief introduction of her, she is doctorate of economics in the Universidad Pompeu Fabra of Barcelona. She's specialized in monetary policy, fiscal policy, and intersection of macroeconomics. She has worked too in universities such as Bocconi or Berna, and work in institutions such as the Central Bank of Europe, the Spanish one, Central Bank of Canada, England, and other institutions such as the Center for Economics Policy Research, Euro Area Business Cycle Dating Committee, or the Center for Macroeconomics. Her curriculum is much more extended as that, but could be very long. So we are going to start. We are going to start now, and thank you, all of you, to come.
Thank you, Victor. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm sorry I will use the microphone because I'm losing my voice. So the way I'm going to talk to you about inflation and monetary policy today is going to be the way I do in my lectures, which is I'll first provide you with some model to think about inflation and monetary policy, okay? And then I will go and apply whatever I'm going to tell you in the theoretical model in the 2023 reality. And I want you to think about this reality through the model that I'm going to show you, okay? So that's the way I'll develop the lecture today. So here we are in the internal of the Bank of Spain. Since I can make pictures there, I just wanted to show you how it looks like. So this is the white stairs. Juanjo knows about that. And let me tell you how I'm going to structure what I'm going to say today. So first of all, I'm going to explain you what is monetary policy making and what is the objectives of the central bank. And then I'm going to tell you about the policy tools that the central bank can work out in order to affect the economy. I will then present a structural model, which is going to be very simple, in order for you to understand how I can think about the dynamics of inflation and how monetary policy can intervene in the economy. And then I'm going to go to reality and talk about what the ECB is doing nowadays and how we can relate that to our model and how we can understand what the ECB is trying to do. And then I will talk a little bit about the role of fiscal policy because, you know, I like fiscal policy too. And then I will tell you what can go wrong and where we are heading. And I will leave some time for you to ask questions or, like, you know, give me your own thoughts. Since this is like a lecture, whenever you feel like, you can just stop me and I will answer any question, okay? So because the idea is that we all understand what I'm doing, okay? So let's go. What does monetary policy do? Well, monetary policy refers to the workings of the central bank, to the actions that the central bank takes to control the supply of money and interest rates in an economy. Now, what we see in reality is that monetary policy can actually react in different ways in the economy, okay? It has various ways, instruments to operate in the markets. So the most known is the OMO, which is the open market operation. So what the central bank does is buying and selling securities, and in this way, increasing or decreasing the supply of funds in the economy, the supply of cash, okay? Then it can also change the discount rate. What is the discount rate? When commercial banks are in difficulty because they cannot really find liquidity. Esto es imposible. Okay, but I'll try. So, all right. Aquí está bien? Okay, so when the commercial banks are in trouble of liquidity, they will go to the discount window to ask for liquidity within a day. So there, the central bank can charge a high interest rates so that the commercial banks are going to be tight and they will not try to create so much money, so as they will keep some liquidity with them, so this is why they control the money supply. And then the reserve requirement ratio is another way, similar, in which the central bank directly tells the commercial banks how much reserve requirements they should keep. So, as I said, the main operation tool is the open market operations, and the central bank is going to inject reserves in the banking system. And when we think about the goals of monetary policy, the monetary policy is trying usually to control the interest rates, because what it wants to do is it wants to control inflation or secondary measures like the unemployment or exchange rates or other kind of, or like financial stability or asset markets, etc. So the main goal of monetary policy is to stabilize inflation, and the main tool is going to be the short-term interest rate. The secondary goal is probably to control unemployment or the output gap. So sometimes you have heard probably people talking about two pillars of monetary policy. So the first pillar is inflation stability. The second is going to be output gap stability. And I will explain you what is this. So what is going to happen is that whenever the central bank goes to operate through the interest rate, an increase in the interest rate is going to make the borrowing more expensive. If borrowing is more expensive, we have seen with some of you in class that this is going to generate a contraction of investment demand or of consumption demand, and this is going actually to contract aggregate demand, and this is how the monetary policy operates. If we want to see it in a graph, think about the loanable funds market. So what I have here is the supply of loans, and here I have the demand of loans. So we are in equilibrium in point epsilon, where we have the loanable fund market where the supply of loans is meeting the demand for loans. An expansionary monetary policy, what it's going to do is that it is going to increase the supply of loans in the economy. What is this going to do? Well, if I have an increased supply of loanable funds in the economy, this is going to put down the price of these funds, and this is the nominal interest rate. Okay, so that's how it works in a simple model. And if we want to think about it, about the economic impact of this policy, what is going to happen is now, if we look at the price level and output, we have the aggregate demand curve and the aggregate supply curve that I'm going to explain further how it is going to be determined. We are going to have that we are in an equilibrium initially here, but when monetary policy is going to be expanding, actually I have that, what is going to happen is that I am going to actually increase aggregate demand, because by lowering the interest rate, I will be able to generate more demand for investment and more demand for consumption, and this is going to expand to the economy to a higher output and a higher inflation. Okay, this is the simple ISLM model. Okay, do you have seen it many times? Now, does it always work? No. Why? Well, because look at here, we have times recently, this is the red line, is the 3-month Treasury secondary market rate for the US, and the blue line is the same kind of interest rate, short-term interest rate for the euro area. So what do we see? We see that the interest rate in the US has hit the lower bound, and it stayed in this lower bound. When I talk about lower bound, I mean the zero lower bound. We had interest rates that they were zero for a very prolonged period in the US. And in Europe, not only they were zero after 2012, but they even became negative after that. Okay? So if my instrument is the short-term interest rate, and I am at the zero lower bound, I cannot announce people, okay, come, I'm going to give you negative interest rates, put your money in the bonds that I'm going to give you negative interest rates. So obviously, the operating tool, the short-term interest rate in this case, cannot work. So for that reason, you might have heard something that is called quantitative easing, or QE. So what is QE? QE is the same time as the work in a similar fashion as open market operations, but it is a very different tool. Why? Because what the central bank does when it does QE is it goes for large-scale purchases of long-term assets, okay? Financial assets. And this has proved to actually expand the economy as if I was going to decrease the interest rates. Why? When I do that, what I'm actually doing is that I am actually reducing the interest rates in long-term assets, which is still positive, okay? So in this way, I am kind of expanding the economy on a different interest rate. Huh? You follow me? And what I'm also kind of signaling is that, you know, if I am buying long-term assets and I reduce their interest rate, this means that I'm going to keep the interest rates low for a longer time. This is like what I'm going to talk to you next, which is forward guidance. As a result, a quantitative easing is another way to expand the economy, to move the aggregate demand, okay? And this is going to work also not only in the zero lower bound, but also in other times. So although it was a policy that was invented during this period of the zero lower bound, it is going to stay with us probably longer. And actually, the way we're going to see it these days is as QT, which is quantitative tightening. So instead of going and purchasing these bonds, now I'm going and give them back in the market. So I'm going to increase the interest rates in long-term bonds, okay? Now, I talked about forward guidance. What is forward guidance? Forward guidance is another tool that I'm going to use at the zero lower bound. What forward guidance does. Here, I'm not buying and selling any bonds. Here, I'm going out as a central banker and I'm making announcements. I say that I'm going to keep the interest rate at 0 for the next 1 year. This is forming the expectations of the agents about how the real interest rate is going to evolve in the coming year. And this is going to be how monetary policy can affect aggregate demand. Okay? So what I am actually doing when I'm doing forward guidance is that I'm convincing the market participants that I'm going to delay or accelerate the instrument that I'm going to work on policy in the coming 6 months or 1 year. Am I clear? Yeah? Good. Well, now I'm going to turn to a more modern model of monetary policy making. And it's very modern that it's called New Keynesian. So you can see it's Keynes, but it is a new Keynes. So I'm not going to talk about ISLM. I'm going to change a little bit the structure of the model, but it's going to look very similar. Okay, so bear with me. If you have questions, stop me. I'm very happy to answer them. And I'm going to tell you how is the structure of this model works and how we're going to apply it to what's happening today. Okay, so that's my plan. This model has 3 building blocks. What we're going to call the Phillips curve or the New Keynesian Phillips curve, which is going to describe how inflation is going to depend on output, so the supply side of the economy. Then we are going to have a dynamic IS curve, which is basically the Euler equation that says how the real interest rate relates to output movements. And then a monetary policy rule, which is going to describe how the central bank is going to react with respect to output and inflation deviations. Okay, from what? From the target and from potential. Am I clear? Good. So let's look at the New Keynesian Phillips curve. What is the New Keynesian Phillips curve telling us? So behind this curve, there is some theory that says that prices are sticky. I forgot. So that says that prices are sticky and that, you know, it is anytime a firm has to change its price, it has to form expectations about how demand is going to be. And it has to form also expectations about how the other people in the economy are going to change demand. Okay? This gives rise to a Phillips curve, which is very similar to the original Phillips curve, but it has a little bit some differences. So inflation here is going to be affected by inflation expectations, okay? And then it is going to also depend on the deviations of actual output from potential. What is this potential output here? As potential output, you might think the natural level of output, which is going to be the level of output that corresponds to the natural unemployment rate, but you can also think as the level of output that will prevail if we wouldn't have any kind of distortions in the economy. Okay, so like if prices would be flexible, every firm would set the price equal to the marginal cost, okay? And that would be the supply curve and it would be vertical. Now, prices are sticky, so firms cannot change their price whenever they want. And as a result, this creates short-run distortions that make output deviate from its potential or its efficient level, okay? So what does this relationship say? Inflation is going to shape with regards to what people expect inflation is going to be, and it is going to be positive whenever there are aggregate demand tensions. Am I clear? And this term here is going to be what we're going to be calling a cost push shock. What is a cost push shock? Is a shock that is going to create a tension for the central bank between stabilizing inflation and stabilizing the output gap. Why? Because if this term is 0, then the central bank can set inflation equal to inflation expectations, and then the output is going to be equal to potential. So I'm going to deliver a first best outcome in which actually, you know, I am producing at full capacity, at potential, and there is inflation is equal to expectations. There's no trade-off. However, whenever these markup shocks are going to appear, I will not be able to do that, okay? So that's why I call this cost push-off. And as you can see, this curve expresses a trade-off between inflation and output stabilization. Why? Whenever output is above potential, this is going to come to a cost of inflation. Do we see that? And if I am at the point in which inflation is equal with its expectations, I'm going to be at the natural level of output. Is everything clear? Yeah? Matthias? All right. Now, let me talk about the Nuclear dynamic IS equation. So this equation, I said, is coming from the Euler equation. You have to make some assumptions. You know, the Euler equation is going to actually determine how much I'm going to consume today with respect to what I'm going to consume tomorrow. And this is going to depend on the real interest rate. And this relationship with some, you have to get a lot of fantasy, it's a similar relationship. It tells me that output is going to depend on potential output, and it's going to be negatively related to what? To the real interest rate. Why? This is the nominal interest rate. This is the inflation in the economy. And this is what I'm going to be calling the natural rate of interest. What is this natural rate of interest? It's going to be the rate of interest that if we manage to equate the real interest rate in the economy to this rate, we are going to have output equal to potential in the absence of any demand shocks. What are these? These are factors beyond the real interest rate that can affect the evolution of output. So this can be fiscal policy, it can be net exports, it can be asset prices, it can be consumer sentiment, whatever you want to put there. What we want to do is that we want to think about this as exogenous and to think that output is actually going to be equal to the potential output, but it's going to be lower whenever the real interest rate is high. So this is like an aggregate demand curve, okay? If I have real interest rates that are really high, this means that my investment demand is going to decrease. If real interest rates are high, I'm going to decrease my consumption, I'm going to save. So this is a dynamic relationship because we can think about this YT star depending on expected output. I didn't write it like very well here because I want to give you a graph that can describe everything together. Am I clear? Are there questions? Yes, Laura.
But how do you compute the natural output?
Yes, okay. So in the complicated models that I don't want to show you today, the way we're going to compute the natural output is when we will be assuming that there are flexible prices. In the sense, I don't have any short-run distortions that would make output deviate from its flexible price output, which is the optimum. So in the model economy, I have price distortions that make prices sticky, okay? So if prices are sticky, what happens is that output is going to be demand determined. Like, I have to give as much output as I am asked from the consumers. Okay? If prices would be flexible and I see an increase in aggregate demand, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my price. However, if prices are sticky, I cannot do that because output is going to be demand determined. So for whatever price I have set, I have to give the product that I am asked for. And this is generating this distortion in the economy, which creates like dispersion in prices within different producers, okay? So in this model, the natural output is going to be the level of output that is going to prevail if everybody would be able to change his price. Yeah? Is that clear? So, and to close the model, we need the monetary policy rule. And what I'm going to present to you is the Taylor rule. What is the Taylor rule? The Taylor rule says that the central banks behave as follows. Follows this like general rule. It's going to set the nominal interest rate equal to the natural real interest rate plus the inflation target of the central bank, so R star plus P star, that's what it is. And then whenever inflation is above the target of the central bank, it's going to actually increase the interest rate by how much? By this phi P. And whenever output is above potential, it's also going to increase the interest rate by how much? By phi Y. What do these terms capture? They capture aggregate demand pressures. Why? Whenever there is pressures of demand, I should expect to see inflation going up and output going above potential, okay? So as a result, what I want to do as a central banker is I want to increase the interest rate. But do I really care as a central banker about the nominal interest rate? No. What I should care is about the real interest rate. I can only contract the economy. You know, people eat cookies. They don't eat dollars. So what I care for is the real interest rate. As a result, what I want to do in order to contract the economy when inflation goes out of control is I want to increase the interest rate more than the increase in inflation. So I want this VP to be bigger than 1. So that the change in the real interest rate, if I have deviations of inflation from potential, is going to be higher than the change in inflation, so that the real interest rate is actually going to increase, and I'm going to contract aggregate demand. Are you following? Yeah? Good? Yes? Oh, I knew it. I told you not to ask questions, but anyways, ask.
May I add a simple
Yes,
question?
sure.
So suppose you expect inflation to rise by 1 percentage point. You increase nominal interest rate by half a percentage point. The real interest rate is going to fall by half a percentage point, 0.5 minus 1. Interest rate goes down, investors, firms, employers will like to invest more. That is going to push aggregate demand even further, which is going to rise inflation. So the effort by the central bank will be self-defeating. They raise interest rate, but not enough to kill inflation. The inflation is exploding.
It's fine. So that's very good. I'm going to hire you as my teaching assistant. Okay. So I'm not very good in giving public talks, obviously. So this shock is generating this trade-off between output and inflation stabilization. No, I have inflation going up. I know the central bank has to cut the has to increase the real interest rate. So the economy is going to contract, and I'm going to create inflation. That's not good. Now, if I am a central banker and I think that this is going to last 1 month, then I don't have to do anything. You know why? Because after 1 month I will go back and I'll sleep well. The problem is if that this thing is not lasting 1 month and it lasts several months. Why? Because if it lasts several months, then what is happening is that the central bank has to do something. And it has to go for some output losses. And the ECB at the beginning was kind of wait and see. And I will tell you why they were doing this wait and see. And as a result, what is the great danger now is that this supply shock has actually not moved only the curve upwards, and now we know that this supply shock is coming down, but it also moved inflation expectations this way. And inflation expectation movements would also shift this curve to the left. Okay? So in this case, we have to do more. We have to be really tough in order to anchor inflation expectations. Because if we have an inflation expectation de-anchoring, we might stay there for a very long while. Okay? So this is what is the de-anchoring of inflation expectations. If inflation expectations de-anchor, so instead of thinking that my equilibrium is Y star with P1, suddenly I think that inflation is going to go up to P bar there. And it's going to remain there forever. So this curve is going to move to the new equilibrium, in which I'm going to have, for any level of output, I'm going to generate more inflation, because that's people believe. That's what people believe. You remember the Phillips curve, it had this term PE. If this PE changes to up, this is the same kind of movement in the shift of the curve. So the central bank, of course, is going to react. We know that it's going to react because inflation pressures are there. And what is going to happen because the central bank reacts is that the real interest rate is going to increase, and at the end, I will end up with higher inflation that will not be as high as the inflation expectations, and lower output. Okay? If I manage to slowly anchor expectations, then I will start moving the opposite way. Okay? So if I believe that now agents believe that expectation inflations are going to drop, then I'm going to move towards where I used to be. Okay? So no woman, no cry. That's it, like no inflation, no cry. I'm going to go back to the equilibrium in which we don't have any output losses. All right? So that is the model. Now, let's see what is reality. The 13th of February, the ECB growth outlook came out, and we had the inflation projections for Europe. And what they say is that the peak is now behind us. The peak, meaning about the peak in inflation. Okay? But we have inflation risk remains. What can happen? What can go wrong? That gas prices can go up again because Putin decides actually not to invade only Ukraine, but he wants another neighboring country. So things escalate again. Second, we have an increased demand coming from the post-lockdown China. If I have an increase in demand coming from China, this is going to push also my prices up. Okay? And I have a tight labor market, and this might actually increase the wage pressures. Okay, so all these factors will contribute to inflationary pressures. So she says we're going to be like confident that inflation might have peaked, but it could be that we might have some risk of inflation there. And if you look like at market participants, the ECB survey of professional forecasters, the CPR economists, Bloomberg, Credit Suisse, they think that inflation has peaked, and yes, there are some dangers, but we're almost there. All right, let's look this. Yes.
In the third bullet point, why do you say tight labor market? We've been rising interest rates, so there is an output is below the natural rate. So in anything, the market is loose, not tight.
No, but you see, what is the problem with the labor market is that, and you should know better, is the fact that we have a low unemployment, like we have low unemployment compared historically, and you know, waste. I will show you. I'll show you. And lower like so far the increase in inflation has not passed to wages, not at least in all the countries. Okay.
So this is a signal that the labor market is loose.
The labor market is loose, but there is anticipation that maybe at some point it will wake up.
But this is fiction.
That's what the ECB says. I don't say that. This is not my bullet points. It's from their.
No, I understand.
yeah.
I understand, but this is contradictory.
I don't know,
Well,
Juanjo.
we'll see.
That's what it says. Now, let me go to the inflation, which is what we care for. So what I have in this plot is coming from their actually publication, is the yellow lines correspond to core inflation. The blue lines is energy and unprocessed food, which is the part of inflation which is kind of more volatile, okay? And the headline inflation is the continuous red line. So what we see when we say inflation has peaked, we talk about this thing, that in October we reached 10.6% euro inflation, and since then the headline inflation is going down consecutively in 2 quarters. That's what inflation peak means. Now, if we look at the forecast of the ECB is that inflation is going to continue going down. Okay? Now, what I want you to notice here, I want you to notice that although this has peaked, this hasn't peaked yet. Core inflation is the inflation that excludes the volatile items like food and energy, and it is the inflation that mostly represents like the inflationary pressures in the economy that come from other things that they are not related to energy prices. So for example, from increases in wages or from increases in services, etc. So we see that this one hasn't peaked. So that's why the central bankers are concerned, because people do not look only at this part, they also look at this, at the core CPI. Now, that's what I said. In February 2nd of 2023, we have seen an increase in the interest rate of the ECB by 50 basis points. And Lagarde already said that we are going to have another increase in March. In a few days, in 1 week, I think, we're going to have another increase of 50% as well. How do we call that if in February she says that in March there's going to be another increase? It's what we call forward guidance. Lagarde puts the pace. We have increased the interest rates, we will continue to increase it, which means that we are serious about controlling inflation here. So you better revise your inflation expectations. So what they are trying to do, in other words, is that they are trying to do what I show you in the graph. They try to anchor back inflation expectations. They try to be aggressive so that the people will believe that inflation is actually anchored, that they can actually make people believe that inflation expectations will go down. Yes? And this they do also with quantitative tightening. Why? Because in December 15, the ECB said it would start reducing its 5 trillion euros worth of bond holdings from March. So they are holding all these bonds and they already tell you, I'm going to intervene. I'm going to do quantitative easing. Quantitative tightening. Which means that there are going to be more pressures of upward pressures in the interest rate. They should contract even further the economy. Are you with me? Yeah? Good. So, what do you want to expect the ECB to do? If the primary objective of the ECB is monetary policy and price stability, then we should expect them to hike further. Okay? They should hike further. And I will show you why. Well, first of all, because the real interest rate is still very low. We are not yet at the Taylor principle. And second, because expectations do not seem to be very anchored. Why we're not at the Taylor principle? Look at here. Here we have the real short-term rates in the United States, the blue line, Euro, the red line, Japan, United Kingdom, and Canada. What I want you to see is that the real interest rates are negative since 20 Q1. And there is no country yet of these advanced economies that has positive real interest rates. So the interest rate in the US the real interest rate is growing kind of faster. Look how bad we are in Europe. We have still negative real interest rates. We need to reverse that. If we really want to contract demand, we have to have higher real interest rates.
These real interest rates are computed with current inflation or with expected?
Yes, this is ex ante, so it is expected inflation. Yeah? So, now, fine, we are going to go for a contraction. We are going to increase the real interest rate. Because we want to contract the European economy, we want to move in an equilibrium in which we will have less inflation. Yes, but this is something that is dangerous because it can go wrong. So what I'm plotting you here is coming from the IMF, the Global Debt Database, and what I'm plotting is this map of Europe where you have countries with different indebtedness, and what I'm talking about indebtedness, I'm talking about household debt. So you understand, an increase in the interest rates, in the real interest rates, is going to affect a lot the people that actually owe money because they have to pay interest rates. Mortgages, exactly. This is mostly what household debt is about. So as you can see, there are some countries in the map, and unfortunately we are here, that they have an indebtedness, the household debt as a percentage of total debt, of GDP, is 80 to 100%. This is us. More than 100% is Portugal. Well, for the United Kingdom, I don't know if I want to talk. I don't know if I want to go anyways. And then we have other countries with lower levels of debt. So, a monetary contraction at the ECB level is going to increase the real interest rates. But the real interest rates are going to affect differently the different countries in the euro area. That's an issue. Because I talked to you about the model in which I have one aggregate demand, one aggregate supply, and one monetary policy rule. Here, I have a much more complicated model. I have one instrument. I want to affect real interest rates. I have the nominal interest rate, the short-term interest rate to intervene, but I'm going to harm people in a different way in my map. Do we see that? Yeah? All right. What about fiscal policy? Fiscal policy, of course, can affect aggregate demand, okay? So fiscal policy can move actually the other curve, the aggregate demand curve, okay? So it can move it up or down. So I can either increase like inflation by expanding demand with expansionary fiscal policy, or I can actually contract demand with cutting the budgets. Now, the problem is that the fiscal policy has to strike a balance here, okay? What is the balance here? From the one hand, I might want to do fiscal consolidation. Why? Because after the COVID-19 crisis, we spent a lot of money in hospitals, health, subsidies, ERTES, whatever, name it. So, and there was no fiscal rule at place, the Maastricht criteria were not there, and they are still not there, which means that, you know, we went a little bit out of our pockets. So, I might want to consolidate. But on the other hand, I know that this inflation that we observe now, it is really hurting the poor, because the poor are the guys that they really mostly suffer from these increases in energy prices. So I have to do something about inequality. I have to give these guys benefits. So from the one hand, I want to cut. From the other hand, I want to redistribute. So I don't know where I have to go, actually. And moreover, this is not my only issue. I have another issue in Europe. This is the debt to GDP rate, the general government debt to GDP ratio in different European countries. So I have Estonia with a debt to GDP of 24%, and I have Greece with 224%. So, you know, it's very symmetric. So, if the interest rates are going to increase, this means that the interest rate that the Greek government, or actually the Italian or the Spanish government have to pay on their debt is going to be a significant part of their budget. Yes? And, you know, with Greece already having one debt crisis, sovereign debt crisis, and Italy very close to having one, and having a very populist government, you know, markets can expect that maybe things will come again. We will see the same movie again, another sovereign debt crisis. And it's going to be contaminated to, it's going to be contagion to Portugal, Spain, but now we have France there, careful, and Belgium was always there. And I think this is Austria, so Matthias, you are in the sample. So now the issue is that it is exactly these countries that might need the fiscal space. Why? Let me show you the unemployment rate in these different countries, like in the countries that they have high debt. So Belgium, France, Greece, Italy, Portugal, and Spain. So what you can see is that for some countries, this is not an issue. The unemployment rate in Belgium is 5.5% more or less. So it's not that high. But this is the black line is the European average. But if I look at Greece and I look at Spain, they have kind of high unemployment, although these are still low relative to historical rates, because in Spain we have seen 20-25% of unemployment, the same in Greece. But still, if I really want to do policies to overcome possible inequalities, I will not have the fiscal space, because here is where I would need it, and as you have seen in this graph, I don't have the money. Yeah, you follow me? Okay, now another thing that it is not discussed at all in policy discussions has to do with the fact that here we are going to intervene with one instrument, which is the nominal interest rate, to affect the real interest rates, but then I don't have one inflation. I have dispersed inflation in Europe. Well, this is what you can see in this graph. Inflation, whether we look at total or the one without the energy price inflation, you can see that it varies between 5% and 6% in Spain to 25% in Hungary and 20% in Latvia. All these countries share, all these countries share the same currency, they have the same interest rate, and whatever is going to happen, what the central bank is going to decide, you can see I have to increase the nominal interest rate a lot to be able to decrease the real interest rate in Hungary. I have great price dispersions. And I cannot do that using monetary policy. So I have to use fiscal policy, okay? So this means, let's go to Estonia. I have to consolidate in Estonia. But what consolidate? I have only 24% of debt to GDP. So what I'm going to do to these guys, I'm going to tell them, no, you don't spend anything. Now you have actually to get like money lended. So, I mean, it doesn't look like, that fiscal policy can work for all the countries, okay? And you see, like in Greece, it doesn't look like, and in Spain, we don't have problems of inflation right now. So the need for consolidation, yes, one second. The need for consolidation is kind of like redundant at the point, okay? So that is like the kind of perils we have in terms of like having one instrument and various countries with various fiscal policies and various systems of pricing that we have to cooperate. Now, Juanjo, ask whatever you want.
No,
Because I'm almost finished,
point
actually.
out that if you look at the guys with the top inflation, which if I read well,
It's the Baltic countries.
Lithuania, Latvia, and Hungary.
You
What
do.
do they have in common? They are close to Russia. They have high dependence on Russia. So that's why they depend a lot on Russian gas and Russian energy and so on. That's why inflation is so high. So the geographical location is crucial here. So if you are close to Russia, you're going to have a hard time.
I mean, Italy is not that close to Russia, I have to tell
No,
you. And Austria either.
But Italian is more or less
Yeah, you're
a
right.
straight line. So, but
What?
Austria is very dependent, or was very dependent on Russian
Yeah,
energy.
Yeah,
in the
like
past.
Germany, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
like Germany.
But still, the issue is the same. The issue is the same. I have one instrument
But it
and
means geography matters.
well, geography matters. It's one thing. One thing is that you might expect that after the energy crisis, these dispersions will disappear. It doesn't look like, because this data come from January 2023. So dispersions do not disappear, although gas prices went down.
It's like for instance, suppose we are worried about the effects of global warming, then it's not going to be the same in the south of Europe than in the north of Europe. So these things have to be taken into account
By who?
by the central bank. They could be,
Yes.
They could do targeted monetary policy.
But how can we do targeted monetary policy if I have one instrument? The only thing that we can do, that's a good thing. Yeah, that's a good point that you're raising, because now the guys know what is quantitative easing, etc. So I can do targeted quantitative easing. I can go and buy assets only from this location, so that I can change the long-term interest rate for these guys and keep the short-term interest rate for all the rest of them. You understand?
Would you say those countries have a disadvantage compared to countries that have their own central bank? Inflation, I mean.
No, I wouldn't say that, because if you have, here we're going to go to the Lucas critique. These guys is not only that if they were not in the EMU, they would be actually in danger of war with Russia. So I don't want to answer this question, because it's really subject to the Lucas critique. I don't know what could have happened to these countries if, like Hungary and Latvia, etc., if they were not in the EMU. So I don't want to address that, because it's a question that I cannot answer with any model.
We know what would have happened, the same as Ukraine.
Exactly, that's what I want to say, but I want to say it because this is not economics, it's politics, and I'm not here to talk about politics. So anyways, let me conclude so I can get your questions. For me, the future is uncertain. I'm not sure that the inflation has peaked. I think that we are somewhere in the deep sea here. I'm not sure that we will be able to avoid the possibility of another sovereign debt crisis, and I'm mostly worried about Italy and Meloni. It looks like she's doing a decent job. She just wanted to be in power. Let's hope that this is the case and this is not going to do any crazy policy when this country has... when this country has a debt to GDP of 74%. And I think that the ECB is doing its work. Many commentators say that the ECB should be more aggressive. I have to, after what I show you, I want you to understand that the ECB has to strike a balance between many factors. It's not only that I'm going to actually decrease demand. There's a lot of asymmetry in the European countries. They have to take this into account. They can try to fit everybody in the same picture, and it's difficult. So I think that they have a lot of challenges, and I think so far they have been doing well. And of course, there are many questions that I left unanswered, so please shoot. You don't have any questions?
Yes, I have one.
No, I say about Marco. Okay, Laura. Está bien, ¿no? Hola. Sí.
Okay. I would like to know if with the quantitative tightening, the central bank can allocate a targeted.
We can't hear you.
I don't know how it works.
Put it closer to your mouth, maybe. Okay.
Just
closer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to know if with the quantitative tightening, the central bank could allocate special measures for each country, or it doesn't work that way?
Well, in principle, quantitative tightening could work, because I can actually target financial assets of specific countries. I can do that. I mean, it is not in the stature of the ECB to do that. Monetary policy should be something that has to do with inflation stability. If I'm going and do quantitative easing and I'm targeting some specific country's assets, then some German court can actually sue me for not doing what I'm supposed to do, as it has happened in the past with Italy. Sorry?
They lost.
Yeah, they lost, but let's see. So the issue is that I can do it in principle, I shouldn't do it. But maybe at the end, if we come to the limits, we will do again whatever it needs. But yes.
If I may add something, suppose the central bank, the ECB starts buying Hungarian or Lithuanian debt. So this implies that the price of debt will go up. There is higher demand. So investors from other countries will immediately realize that if they want to gain some money, they better invest on those banks. So eventually there will be a flood, an inflow of euros into Hungary, which will push inflation even higher. So remember, Hungary was a country. So when you have perfect capital mobility and a fixed exchange rate, you cannot have it all. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why the ECB is abstaining from doing this targeted policy, because of free capital mobility.
Yeah? Yes, Bruno?
You have mentioned Italy twice in this lecture, and I want to know why it's dangerous for inflation rates and indebtedness. Why is a populist government more dangerous than a more moderate one?
Well, because we have seen this film already in 2016 with Europe and as a protagonist Tsipras. So what happened is that we had a populist government that said that, you know, we are going to resist the Europeans, we're going to go out of Europe, okay? So this, what created for the Greek population was capital controls, you know, a lot of suffering and a Great Depression. Like we had output decreasing in Greece for a long, long time. Now, Greece was not a problem because it was a small open economy. Now, Italy is a rich country, and it is like the third biggest country in Europe. So if Meloni goes and says, look, I really don't care, what I'm going to do is like, I am going to go out of Europe, and the markets believe that this is the case, then you understand all the Italian assets held by banks in different European banks are going to lose their value. You know, nobody would want to have them. And if this is like a lot, which is probably the case, then this is going to create problems of sustainability of the financial system. Of course, we have lived the Greek crisis, we have lived the tensions in Portugal, Spain, etc. We are more prepared than before, but we're talking about a big player. Now, like, Italy is too big to fail. So that's why I'm talking about Italy. That's why I'm worried about Italy, because a populist government, what they can do is like they can actually increase markets' appetite, like for, you know, or like expectations about things going wrong. And then these expectations can become self-fulfilling.
I would talk about right-wing populist politics.
Yes, okay, like because, yeah, that's the difference with Tsipras, it was left-wing. Meloni is right-wing, that's the difference.
So it doesn't matter if it's left or right wing, populism is dangerous for all the stability?
I told you this is not a question I can answer because it's, I mean, I'm not here to tell you my political opinion. What I think is that what populist government are doing is that they want to listen, they want people to listen things like speeches, like when, you know, you get Miss Universe, you know, have you ever seen a contestant of Miss Universe? Miss Universe goes there and she says, so what you're going to do? And they say, oh, I'm going to have peace in the world. I'm going to make sure the kids are not starving and all this stuff. So this is populist government. That's what they do. They go there and they say all the things that people want to listen, but they cannot be done. So, but if people listen and they believe them and they create expectations that this is going to happen, that Greece is going to leave the Europe or Italy is going to leave the Europe, then this creates tensions in the markets. So that's the problem of the populist governments, nothing else. Like they don't realize that their words have weight. They have like weight in the market's expectations. Yes, other questions? Yes, Victor?
In the past, the interest rates has been very high compared to the actually the interest rates of nowadays or the interest rates of before the financial crisis. Do you think that in a mid-term or a long run, levels of interest rate like over the 15 or even 20 could be real again, or is something of the past economic policy?
So there we go to the argument of Juanjo about co-integration that he said at the beginning, that me and him were co-integrated. So we have a relationship that we call the Fiscal equation, okay? What the Fiscal equation tells you is that for a given real interest rate, inflation and nominal interest rates should move together, all right? So like, and when I'm talking about moving together, I'm talking about trends. I'm not talking about cycles, okay? Which means that if we think that the real interest rate is constant, if we see inflation going up, also the interest rates are going to go up. So we had in the 70s and the 80s high interest rates because we had high inflation, right? So now we are at the point in which we are getting to higher inflation rates, but the interest rates, as you have seen, are still very low. We have inflation on average 10%, interest rates at 3%. So I guess we should take this chance as a chance to go out of the zero lower bound, okay, and try to establish an interest rate which is going to be like something that we can think that it can work within a reasonable bound. And it's going to naturally, the nominal interest rate is going to follow the kind of same trend as inflation. So when inflation is going to go down, the nominal interest rate will just go down as well. So these two things should move together. We don't have any changes in the real interest rate, okay? Maybe the green transition is going to change the real interest rate, the natural rate of interest, okay? And many other things, DFP, whatever. But as long as this is constant, inflation, nominal interest rates should move together. That's fiscal. Yeah? Yes.
If you look even at the longer run, I think one of the biggest trends in most Western economies, especially in Europe, is aging. There is very low fertility and people live much longer. So this implies, for instance, in Spain now, there are 10 million pensioners, but in 20 years, the 10 million is about 10 divided by almost 50, we have 47 million, it's about 20%. In 20 years, there will be 33% of the population will be pensioners. So old people are less productive than young people because we suffer Alzheimer and we are weaker and so on. So the productivity is going to go down. This is what is called the great stagnation. It's been called by pundits the great stagnation. So if productivity goes down, capital productivity, the marginal productivity of capital is going to go down, and therefore the real interest rate, which is the marginal productivity of capital, is going to be low. So what we expect, as if nothing happens in the future. Of course, if we implement efficient policies in terms of increasing fertility and so on, things may change.
Yeah, but it's also something else along the same lines. If population is aging, these guys, you know, they're retirees, they're going to have high savings. So the savings curve is going to be higher than, and as a result, having higher savings means that the real interest rate is going to go down, okay?
No, but remember, the old people is safe. We don't save.
Yeah, but still, people, if they know they're going to live longer, they have to save more.
Yeah.
So this is going to create excess supply of savings, and this is going to lower the interest rate. So it comes both from the marginal cost of capital side and the TFP, but also from the saving curve, okay, for the demand for savings. Oh, Matthias, I missed your questions.
Related question maybe. Do you think it's that we can keep up pension funds and stuff in general? Because in Austria there's a lot of talk about like in 15, 20 years the pension system is going to collapse. So what effects this will have on economy and on expectations?
You can't ask this question here in Spain.
Oh no, but like I don't know what the situation is like in Spain, but I figure it's going to be the same, no?
I think it's worse, probably. Actually, it's good that we have Juanjo with us, because probably he knows better about the pension system in Spain than me.
Well, I mean, remember, in most countries we have what we call a pay-as-you-go system. So basically, the pensions are paid by the current workers. So my pension is paid by my daughters when I retire. So why is it so? Because, of course, my granddaughters are going to pay the pension of my daughters and so on and so forth. And why is that sustainable? Because at one stage, for instance, young people like you having heart problems, in getting stable jobs, stable life plans, and so on, and would say, why do I have to pay my parents' pension? One reason is that basically by paying your parents' pension, you are giving back to them what your parents invested in your education. So it's like paying back through taxes, through helping you. They invested in you. So there is this intergenerational link, right? So this implies that if the pension system suffers, public education system is going to suffer a lot, right? Because if I refuse to pay the pension of my parents will say, well, then I will not pay your education, intergenerational. So, but the problem with pension is we have pension system which is financed by contributions, social security contributions. A pension could be paid from any taxes. So now with low fertility and long lives, what we have is a lot of pensioners and few contributors. So usually in the past, we used to have 3 to 4 workers per pensioner. Okay, so my pension was paid by 3 or 4 workers, whereas now it's almost 2. So 2 workers pay a pension. And if productivity has increased a lot, that wouldn't mind, because if the 2 workers produce as much as the 4 workers, nothing changes. But productivity hasn't risen so much. So what would be the solution? The solution would be to de-anchor the pensions from contributions and be paid by general taxes. Okay, so you pay with other taxes. But of course, if you pay with pensions with other taxes, there will be other expenditure items that will suffer, like education, like health. Okay, you cannot have it all. But the pension system is never going to fail, right? Because if there is enough resources to pay the pensions, you just de-anchor it.
Yeah, and I think, like, relative to what we have just said, having a low real interest rate means that also the returns of pension funds are going to be low. Yeah. And that's another issue. So I have a population that it is aging. I have extra needs to pay these pensions, and then I cannot get any returns from the pension funds that I have invested in order to get the pensions that I need to pay in the future. So
also, this would explain why, for instance, is this high rate of home ownership in Spain, because the only thing that we basically trust we can leave to our kids is an apartment or a house or whatever, bricks. So that's why we are so obsessed with buying dwellings and buying houses and so on.
That's true. Yes, it's kind of like a pension, like
something
a plan.
tangible rather than intangible.
Good. I didn't think we would talk about pensions. You have another question? Yes. Laura first. Yeah.
As far as I know, the Swiss government, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're very much encouraging the population to invest in foreign assets, no? And in, for example, houses, real estate in Switzerland and outside of Switzerland to, as far as I know, kind of go around this problem, because they want the population to kind of secure their own funds, no? Would this be feasible for Spain, for example, or for other European countries as well?
I mean, any rational agent, knowing how is the pension system in Spain or probably in Austria, should have his own private pension, right? With his own funds, of course. I mean, that's like, it would be like really irrational not to have your own pension plan. Huh?
With low interest rate, you just said the returns are going to be low.
Yeah, the question is it possible? Because
of course, why it's not possible?
But
Capital mobility.
Obviously,
but
wages in Spain at the moment, as far as I know, pretty low, like the average wages. Yeah. So is it possible to save enough with the current energy prices and inflation and whatever? So what would be a solution? Because uncoupling pensions from the current workers and moving them to taxes is also not really feasible because because the state will suffer and the whole economy will suffer as a result. No.
Right.
So what can you do?
Well, you can still save a little bit more, I guess. You know, you just don't go to the cinema twice a week. You go once. I mean, but I'm serious now. You know, you have to find your own way if you really believe that this is not going to work.
I guess what the Swiss government is trying to convey is that you should diversify risk. You don't put all the eggs in the same basket.
Yeah.
Okay, so this would be one idea behind that, and there is free capital mobility. In fact, some countries, for instance, until recently, Portugal or Spain, gave you residence in the country if you invested more than €500,000 in property. Okay, that ensured your nationality. Portugal just suspended it like 1 week ago or 2 weeks ago. So this is part of the deal. What's the issue, for instance? I think this fuss about these special facilities, for instance, have come into under pressure because many of these investors were Russians. So you had all the Russians investing in palaces and housing in Spain, in Italy, and so on. So that was worrisome, and with Putin around, and that's why most of these regulations are under scrutiny now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Laura, ask the last question. I saved the last question for you.
And what would you think the ECB should do to manage the present situation? I mean, how do you think the ECB should?
I told you, they have to be aggressive. They have to increase interest rates more. I have told you already in private.
But only with that
Yeah.
measure for all countries in different situations, it would be enough.
For the moment, they are going to increase the interest rate in March. They said that probably 50 basis points, maybe 75, maybe. And yeah. And they will increase them even further.
I disagree with that.
Well, you can disagree as much as you want, but that's what they are going to do.
No, but they're going to do that, but that doesn't mean that this is good. Okay? You are making a positive statement.
No, I didn't say it's good. I said what they're going to do. She asked me. She didn't ask me if it's good.
No, I want to know what you think they should do, because
I think that if inflation is 10% and the interest rate is 3%, the interest rate has to increase. That's what the monetary policy mandate says. And if you don't like it because the poor are suffering, you have fiscal policy. And there are no fiscal rules in place. So now we're going to fight, you'll see. That's what we do it all the time.
Go back to the forecast about inflation
Yeah.
and core inflation. Okay? So why does, by the way, the graph doesn't say anything about the yellow, what's going to happen to the yellow area in the future.
They
So
don't have a forecast about core.
but then we don't know whether it's peak.
I tell you
or not.
why we don't have a forecast, because they don't want to give this public information, because probably the forecast is like this. It's still going up.
Or maybe it's going down as well.
If it would go down, they would
Anyhow,
show it,
look at
I
that.
tell you.
So we are taking out all the volatile components like energy, non-elaborated food, and so on. So what is left? Is left
Inflation,
coffees in the
no.
bar and anything we buy in the supermarket.
No, these are like securities, like
What
this
do
is
we
insurances.
know about gas price and electricity price? That is going down. So how costs are going down? Wages haven't increased. So why are prices going up? Because the price margins are going up a lot.
Okay, I have to say that. I have to stop you, because it's not true that wages didn't go up. They didn't go up in Spain. They went a lot up in Belgium.
Okay.
So this is
But-
this is an average.
Yeah, but
So there are wage pressures here.
Belgium is 1/4 of Spain, so it's 10 million people.
Fine,
Yeah.
but they went up also in other countries, like in France they went
Small
up.
ones, not the big
Still,
ones.
still.
The Germans are very prudent.
Here they didn't go up. And
No.
if you want, I can explain you why.
So
Wages here
so it's
didn't go
margins,
up
it's
because...
price margins, it's the
It
employer
doesn't let me. It's my lecture.
squeezing you
Eh.
out. So,
So-
if it's employers, what you should do is introduce competition, more competition in the private market, not raise interest rate. That's a big mistake. They already did this mistake when, as said before, in 2008, there was this crazy guy in charge of the ECB, Trichet,
Trichet,
a French guy, who rose interest rate just when Lehman Brothers was collapsing in Europe. So the result was a complete disaster.
Yeah,
And
but this
they
is a
are-
different experiment, Juanjo, and also you have to understand that this is something which is recorded. Everybody, this is going to be an evidence that we have fought in public. So the issue is that what I'm telling you is that there are wage pressures, okay? There are wage pressures, not here. And I wanted to explain to the guys why we don't have wage pressures in Spain. Because in Spain, in Italy, in Greece, we have a big underground sector. You know, probably you have worked as waiters without being paid the social security, etc.
False.
Let me finish. So what happened is with the COVID, you experienced a very negative shock. And many people that they were working in the underground sector saw the guys that they were working in the formal sector getting ERTES, and them didn't get anything. So they said, oh, look, if I work in a normal job, I have security, you know. So I prefer to have the security in face of big shocks and actually get less money as a salary. So we had shown an expansion in employment without seeing an increase in wages because we had an increase in supply of labor towards the formal sector. That's, I think, what happened. I don't have the data, and you cannot tell me I'm wrong unless you show me the
Wrong
data.
for the following reason.
Show me the data. Come.
So, during ERTES, not only workers
Okay, he says that and then we finish.
employment benefits, also the employers were getting subsidies to social security contribution, big subsidies. So many firms that were underground went on the surface to get the subsidies.
You
So
see?
this implied that, for instance, 300,000 jobs in Spain. We have the occupied population is about 20.5 million, so 300,000 is not peanuts. Went from the underground economy to the legal economy. So Spain was a country which had a large moonlighting, a large underground economy, but not any longer, not after ERTE.
Yeah.
And once you become legal, it's very difficult to go underground again. So if you are underground all your life, you may not be discovered, but if you get legal to get the subsidies, then of course the inspectores de Hacienda are going to chase you. So that's why I disagree.
Okay, thank you for the guest appearance. Thank you also for the invitation. I hope I was clear and you learned something today. And I hope now next time you go to a discussion about inflation and monetary policy in Europe, you have the tools to answer the difficult questions. Huh? Okay.